Hey there, I'm Jill Griffin. I'm a career strategist and executive coach, and I am here today with Maria Ross, listen, I read a lot of books. I read a book or more a week, and this book I was not only highlighting and underlining and like talking about, but her book, The Empathy Dilemma, which we are going to talk about today, is phenomenal, and this is a real treat, everyone. So whether you're watching or listening, I would like to introduce you to Maria.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for having me. It warms my heart when I hear people saying they've highlighted and posted noted and all the things on my book.
And
Thank
yelled
you.
out loud in agreement.
Yes, preach. Yeah.
So, Maria, why don't you let our listeners and viewers know a little bit more about yourself and give them a brief overview?
Sure. I am Maria Ross. I am a empathy advocate, I like to say. I'm a speaker, I'm an author, I'm a podcast host. My podcast is called The Empathy Edge. And I come from the world of brand strategy and marketing. And so my whole career has really been about how to help people connect and engage with their audience. Now, what I'm all about is helping people understand the power and the strength of empathy as a lever for achieving radical success, whether it's for your own leadership, to build a thriving culture, or to build an engaging brand. And that's what I'm all about. I give keynotes, I give leadership trainings. I'm a TEDx speaker. And like I said, I got my podcast, which I love. I love talking to other experts.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm the nerd, like I said, highlighted, page numbered, all of that. And I want to jump right in. So on page two, which is where it started, I was like, well, you talk about a bit around the empathy, and you say a lack of empathy did not seem to be the issue. To me, it seemed that they had been conflating empathy with a need for more trust. Take us
Mm.
through, tell us what that is in context that people are definitely going to want to highlight and bookmark this part of the
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my work is about helping people understand what empathy is and what it isn't, because there's a lot of misunderstanding that either burns us out because we don't understand what empathy means, or it causes us to shy away from empathy in the workplace. So, empathy through the work that I do is about being able to see, understand, and where appropriate, feel another person's perspective. It doesn't mean you have to be crying on the floor with your employees. But then you use that information. It's sort of a method of information gathering of someone's context and where they're coming from. So then you can use that information to act with compassion. And compassion is really empathy in action. What is my next right step to take with this person? It doesn't necessarily mean, to get into some of the myths, it doesn't mean I'm just being nice, because you can be nice, but it doesn't mean you see my point of view. It doesn't mean I cave into unreasonable demands, right? That's people pleasing. That's
Mm,
submission. That's not empathy. That's not perspective taking to find a way forward. And it also doesn't mean agreeing with someone. You can have an empathetic conversation with someone to understand their point of view and why they think the way they do. And you can walk away saying, I still don't agree, but I see how you got there. And
mm,
so maybe we can find common ground together. So, really that's about helping people understand that it is, like I said, with some of my very analytical left brain leaders who are not too into the emotional side of it, helping them understand, hey, think of it as information gathering. Think of it as a way to embrace curiosity, find out what's going on for someone else, because you may find a good idea. You may find an interesting rationale for why they feel the way they do. You might be able to address a problem, a root cause that you didn't see. And that really helps them embrace empathy. As there's cognitive empathy and there's emotional empathy. Cognitive is using your head to
mm.
imagine what something is like for someone. Emotional is when you actually can share the emotions. You're sad, I start tearing up. You're really anxious and upset, my palms start getting sweaty, whatever it is. But both of those things, you can access empathy through either door to lead to an act of compassion.
Mm. So you've said so many things in there, but the one thing that's sticking in my mind first is the part around empathy and compassion. And it's making me think that, empathy without leadership gives you connection, but no solutions. And then
Exactly.
leadership without empathy is sort of that toxic old power over versus power with.
Yes.
And that it's that compassion and the connection that we need to, I'm guessing we can teach, like some people are born with it, other people we can teach and teach them how to, it's a very coachy term, but we would say hold space and let the individual express themselves without
Yes.
stepping on them or telling them to
Right.
stop
Or
talking
trying to solve their
or
problem.
starting to
Yeah.
solve a problem.
And actually, science shows we are actually born with empathy. So I
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
call BS on some leaders of not
Okay.
embracing their empathy because we're born with it. It's innate to us. It's barring certain pathological conditions. That's outlying, right? For the
Right.
most part, humans are born with it. There's studies that have been done on babies and on children, and we're born with it. But for some of us, the muscle atrophies. So
Mm.
whether we grow up in or we're in a work environment that doesn't celebrate it, reward it, model it, acknowledge it, that muscle, just like any other muscle when we don't go to the gym or don't work out with weights, it atrophies.
Yeah.
So the great news is, to your point, it can be strengthened, but it has to be more intentional if your muscle has gotten weak. And that just requires you to really be thinking about those interactions. Maybe it's not your standard operating procedure right now to be a good listener or to be curious or to be able to put ego aside. But all of those things can be learned if you decide that's the kind of leader you want to be. And given what the data and the research show about how being an empathetic leader improves performance, retention, loyalty, innovation, customer revenue, it's in your best interests to try to build that empathy muscle as a leader, even if you're like, well, I'm just not really touchy feely. Like, you
Yeah.
don't have to be touchy feely to be empathetic and see someone else's point of view.
Right. Right. And, one of the themes that to me was really obvious throughout the book was the balance of empathy and accountability, right?
Hmm.
That empathy, and I think we get confused because we have our own opinions, and then there's a lot in our face around media about how to walk that line. Like,
Yeah.
and as a leader today, we're hearing, there's a lot of discussion around return to office, whether I should work from home, the hybrid, what's the right approach.
Hmm.
I'd love for you to explain to people a little bit around how a leader can walk that line between empathy
Hmm.
and accountability.
Yeah, I'm definitely pro both and leadership, not either or, right? So we don't have to choose between being empathetic or high performing, being empathetic or holding people accountable, and especially being empathetic or being, maintaining our own strong boundaries. And I think that's the false narrative we give ourselves. And it's really about both and. How can I be empathetic and be there for my employees and support them to deliver the work at the level I need them to deliver? Like, that's the part people leave out, right? And so you're not, when you're trying to approach maybe an underperformer, let's say, or someone who has an issue or has an interpersonal conflict with someone else that they're working with, the goal that we need to keep in mind as leaders is we want to up level their performance. So what needs to be done to up level their performance? We can guess, we can make assumptions, we can say, well, this is what would motivate me, but none of that is empathetic. What's empathetic is, tell me what's going on for you.
Mm,
Tell me what your vision is. Tell me what motivates you. What are you passionate about? And leveraging that to meet your goal as a leader, which is to get the best level of performance, get the best level of engagement. And quite frankly, if you want your bonus at the end of the year, you want your employees to be operating at their optimum level. And the way to get them at their optimum level is through empathy. So they're not mutually exclusive things of, if I'm empathetic, that means my performance will slip. That's what I hear all the time.
yeah.
But that's because of what you think empathy is, and not engaging it in a way where you're understanding that empathy is about helping you both reach a goal, not lowering your standard down to the other person, but helping the other person raise their standard up so that the team can perform.
Okay. So you and I joked before this conversation that we were going to be probably threading the needle back and forth from the employer to the employee.
Yes.
So, from the employee side of what you just said, what I know when I work with my private clients or when I work within organizations is the lack of
Hmm.
trust and transparency. I've
Yes.
also been in situations where there is no way I am telling that person any of my needs because it's going to come back in 6 months in a different way, served in a dish that I don't want to eat. Right. So, what would
Yeah.
you say to someone who's like, but I don't know if I trust my leader enough to share with
Uh-huh.
them, you know, my child's sick, I have an aging parent, my own health issues, or I'm just feeling burnt out without it being
Yeah.
against me? What would you say to someone who
Well, what I would say is, first of all, it depends, again, it depends on your situation. And are you able to be in a situation where if you had to, you could leave that job for a different job? And if there's some sort of safety around, I have agency to make my own decisions about if this leader or this organization aligns with my values or not,
mm,
then my first thing would be to say, have a conversation and say, look, this behavior or whatever it is, I have this situation going on at home, and bring it back to the business. Especially if there is a lack of trust and there's not really a close relationship, bring it back to business performance. And what's the shared goal? I know that we need to deliver X. Here's what's getting in the way of me delivering X. This is what's going on for me at home. You don't have to get weepy. You don't have to get emotional. You can just make a statement and
mm,
say, and I've been holding out on telling you that to get what I need to actually complete the project or get to the goal, meet the KPI, because I didn't feel like I could tell you that. Now, one of two things could happen. One is that's actually eye-opening for the leader of I didn't realize that you couldn't trust me with that kind of information. Of course you could trust me. Like, let's figure out together what we can do. Again, bringing it back to meet the common goal, right? I don't have to completely off track and then start, providing, delivered meals to your family or, whatever. I don't have to get into the personal if we don't want to go there. But if we can bring it back to the goal, and that's where we go wrong is we end up holding it in, holding it in, holding it in until we do have an emotional outburst at our leader. And now they're just surprised, right? So that's one way it can go. The other way it could go, which I would probably place money on a bet that this would be a minuscule percentage of
mm,
bosses. And even I will say this, even one of my most psychologically abusive bosses, I know for a fact that when someone was in need of something from a personal perspective, she was the first person to step up. So even
mm.
though her behavior didn't engender trust and she wreaked havoc on our organization, there was like she had humanity in her. And so when
Well, and
someone
I would
did
say
come to
because she
her,
could be the hero in some way, but we're
and she could be the hero. Yeah, that's for another
right.
conversation.
But
But
either a different conversation, but either
yeah,
way, what you're
yeah.
saying, even in
But
there,
yeah,
there
and
was
I'm saying
empathy.
it would be a minuscule percentage of people that would say, I don't care,
Right.
get it done, because
Get it
that
done.
doesn't actually meet their goal. So that's actually not good leadership, right?
Right.
So, take the chance of having the conversation, but if you have the conversation, keep it focused on shared goals and keep it focused on how it's impacting the work and your desire and your willingness to find a way to find a strategy to adapt so that you can help complete the goal. That's a
Mhm.
completely different conversation than just falling apart in your boss's office who you don't
Yeah.
trust, right?
Yeah. It's also making me think from the other thing you said about like having a conversation, you know, I often suggest to people that you took a job because the data points that we knew, right? What you were going to be doing, who you're going to be doing it for, potentially shared values, the salary you were getting, the data points were
Mhm. Mhm.
that might shift, right? For any of
Completely.
us that were working with an organization pre-COVID, we
Mhm.
shifted in those early months of COVID, and then
Yeah.
many of us are seeing a shift to what is the next thing they're becoming. So I
Right.
think what's important is just as your organization is doing their own strategic planning, you need to be doing
Mhm.
that too, and you need to look at,
Yes.
you know what, for a year or two, this was the right place for me, and it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the place. It means that your values have shifted, and you need to think
Yes.
for yourself, well, if you do have important things going on with the members of your family or people that you live with, that maybe it's
Mhm.
also time to check in of what is the job look like, or what does work look like for me now? And
Yeah.
it doesn't always have to be that way either. I love the concept of a portfolio career where maybe for this time I need to take something
Yeah.
that's a little bit different and I have the agency to do that.
I
And then
was
I
just going to
always
say,
come back to another
yeah.
opportunity another time.
Yeah, it's about remembering we have agency, and this is why clarity is one of the 5 pillars in the new book, because if you can be crystal clear as a leader and even as an organization about what our mission is, what our values are, what they look like in practice, and what we believe, how we treat each other, then now I can make a better decision as an employee to say, Great. Is this what I want to sign up for or stay signed up for?
Mm,
The company can run itself however it wants to run itself. They actually have that right. And if
right.
they're making business decisions about return to office, about, job hours, whatever they're doing, whether that's well informed or not, that's sort of like what you and I are working with leaders on.
Yes.
But if you're talking to an employee, they've clearly stated what's happening. You can give feedback. You can give it constructively. You can give it in a way that's here's why this is, again, going to impact the work. If they don't budge, they don't have to.
Right.
So now it's on you to have some agency. If you are not necessarily trying to change them, now you have to figure out, is this a place where I still want to be? And
Right.
that doesn't have to be a contentious conversation. This is like my whole point where it's like if you're a leader and someone's coming to you demanding, I don't want to come back into the office 4 days a week. The empathetic response as a leader is to say, I hear you and I understand. I understand that this might be difficult for you in this season, as you're talking about, of your career, your life. I get it. And it might not be the place for you anymore. You're right. It might not align with your values and your needs right now. So what can I do to support you to move on? What can I do to support you to find a different role? How
Right.
can I provide references? Can I provide some contacts for you? It doesn't have to be an argument. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be like ultimatum slamming doors. Like it
Yes.
can be an empathetic conversation.
And what I was reading, and the part again, it gets right in there on page 3 going about empathy being weaponized, which I wanna
Mhm.
dig into a bit, but what I was reading there and, if you talk to people who are in a return to office situation that are unhappy about it, is
Mhm.
they really think that they are gonna win. So
Yeah.
the getting and look, I want you to win, but I also respect that an organization has been able to say our values, our productivity, our creativity, our innovation, it's slipped, it's fallen. We need to
Mhm.
have you all come back in if that's, what their needs are. But
Right.
in that conversation, if I go to you and say this doesn't work for me, I think what I'm hearing is the shock from the employee when empathetic leader says, I'm so sorry to hear that. How can I help you exit with grace and excellence? That they're expecting to win.
Yeah.
It's to your point, as if it's an argument. And look, sometimes you will, and like I'm rooting for
Yeah.
you, but the company also gets to make a decision too. They're
Yeah,
allowed
they
to
do.
run how they want to run. And I think that's a bit of the challenge that I'm thinking is that there's a lot of people, there's a large organization that you and I both know that has their employees writing a petition right now, trying to overturn the return to office for
Mhm.
4 days a week. And I don't know how many thousands of people are on it, but it's a small percentage based on the numbers of employees that they have. And
Mhm.
who knows what will ultimately happen, but the
Yeah.
idea that in this market at this time with our current level of workplace dynamics,
Mhm.
that I think a lot of these people think that their seat isn't going to be quickly filled.
Mm.
We know that there are people who are ready and willing and able to
Yeah.
do those jobs and step into
Yeah.
roles, and that would be
Well,
messy and unfortunate, but
yeah.
what do you I mean, I'm sure from your side of the table, you're seeing a lot of that.
I am. And this is where now I'm going to talk to the leaders and the companies here of that, we need to remember that innovation doesn't happen inside four walls. Like we proved it. We proved it during the pandemic when we had to that your company could still operate, it could still produce. And um, there's so many benefits to opening up the talent pool, being able to retain employees that otherwise wouldn't have been able to keep working. Moms who have to deal with their kids or people dealing with elder care or whatever, having a disability. All of those things are good. And so I would, at the one side of my mouth is like, are you sure you really want to do this? Like, why are you doing it? If you're doing it because your leaders are scared and they don't know how to lead people unless they can see them, then that's a problem. That's
Mhm,
on you. You guys need to work on that. If you're doing this because there's legal requirements, because there's, there, like you said, productivity has been slipping, all of these things, then yeah, that could be a good decision. So I would say make sure you're making this decision from the right place and not just because, oh, you had your fun being treated like humans during the pandemic. Now it's time to get back to work. Because I'm scared as a leader that if I can't see you, you're not
mhm.
doing the work. And I don't know how to lead in a hybrid and remote environment, and I don't want to learn. Like
Yes.
that's not an excuse to bring everybody back to work. So
Yeah.
that's the argument I have behind closed doors with leaders, right? But then when I'm talking to the employees, it's also they're telling you how they're going to move forward. They're telling you what they need and how they want to operate their company and their culture. Now you have a decision to make.
Yeah.
And somehow if those two things can meet in the middle, but it, like with your work too, it depends on the company, it depends on the industry, it depends on the role. And this is why, I had a great conversation on my podcast with the head of HR at Box, the file sharing company.
Mhm.
And what I loved about their approach is they said no one knows the answer. There's no one right answer
Right.
for
There's
every
not.
company. She's like, so we're experimenting. We're
Yes.
trying different models. We're trying different things. We're trying a few days back in the office, a few days out. We're doing a lot of listening. We're getting a lot of feedback. We're making tweaks. That's the mindset. We need to have like a design, a design thinking mindset when it
Yeah.
comes to return to office. And we need to look at what is driving the decision. Because if it's because the leaders just don't want to deal, that's not an excuse.
Or because I have a building with rent to pay and I need to
Or I
go
have a building with rent
outside.
to pay. Like my husband joined a company in the pandemic where a lot of their workforce was remote anyway. But they were like, yeah, we're letting the lease lapse. This
Yeah.
is ridiculous. We
Yeah.
clearly can produce and innovate. Now, you can be strategic about when you bring people together in person, right? We are wired to be in person and touch and see and like, read body language and all of that. So be strategic. Do you need to be in the same office every day for status calls every week? You don't.
Right. Right.
Do you need to
Yeah.
be together when you're doing a yearly strategic planning session or a quarterly review? Yes, of course.
Yeah.
So be intentional and strategic about when you get people together if that's your concern.
Yes. And I think also the thing that I've seen most recently, and I don't know that they would want to be named, so I'm not going to name the company. They are in the financial space. And what they have done really, really well is you are in the office for 1 week a quarter. And what
Mm.
they do is it's conjoining teams. So it might be
Mm.
that the engineering team and the product team are aligned. And from Monday through Friday for that quarter, you are in the office.
Oh, I like
I
that.
think there's some balance of depending on
Yeah.
proximity, whether or not you're commuting,
Right.
whether or not you're getting a stipend for the hotel room, but you are
Mm-hmm.
in the office. So then the next week it might be finance and marketing. The next, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that it is 1 week of full working, full connection. Your nights are not your nights. Your nights
Yeah.
have team dinners. And then we will see you in 3 months.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that it is giving the balance of, because even coming in that 1 day a week, we've also heard so many people talk about, I come in, but then I sit on a Zoom call all
But
day.
the office is empty.
Office is
Exactly.
empty,
Exactly.
which would be
Yeah.
maddening if I just made a 2-hour commute in.
Uh-huh.
So I think that model of what I'm hearing, and they're
Mm-hmm.
in their 3rd year of that,
Yeah.
and that
That's
seems
great.
working well. And again, you get the immersive with your
Mm-hmm.
team, and then we'll see you
Well,
in 32 more weeks.
and I have a question for you. Like if we can have a little back and forth on this. One of the things I have heard about the negative is, which is kind of shocking, is that and kind of shocking and kind of not, is that there are many Gen Z, younger millennials, especially those who don't have families yet, they don't have families of their own, who are wanting to be back in the office because it's their social system. And
Yeah,
I can attest, I made all my best friends at work
I'm
when I
right
was in my
there with you.
20s. I met my husband at work. Like
Yep.
there's something to be said. And so they feel like they're not getting the FaceTime and the serendipity and the social interaction that you get in an office. I'm wondering, and I haven't looked into enough reports on this, but I hear these little anecdotes here and there. What are you seeing around that?
Yeah, it's definitely nuanced. So for our listeners, this is not fact, this is not data, this is not statistics, this is what we're seeing in our own bubbles,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So
Exactly.
so
Yeah. I
this is
don't
what
have a
we're
data. I don't have a
seeing, right?
report
I
to
don't have a
point
data
out to
point
you.
for this.
Yeah.
But I think it also comes back to the age of the children in the household, or the age of the aging parent and
Hmm.
proximity to where that aging parent is to the worker,
Right.
right? So that's where, if I was to summarize. Um, it is exactly true that the based on, Gen
Like
X,
the
on
like
my
the
generation,
early in their career people, the people
the
who it's
early
like
in
their
their
first
career
job.
people,
Yeah.
first jobs, there's some of them because of their college experience with COVID, they don't even know what the potential is that they're missing. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry, and I hope that you get that some point, but if it wasn't for, like you said, some of your best friends and even today, some of my closest friends, if it wasn't for those people in the network that I created, my COVID experience would have been a lot more mentally damaging to me and a lot harder.
Yes.
I had 20 years of
Of a network.
working and meeting people and, like, every day called 2 or 3 people just to connect, right? So that's
Exactly.
there, and there is something about making a relationship that's not just through social media, right? Making a
Mhm.
relationship because you sat in the workstation or the cube farm or at
Yeah.
the period table and working together and being in
Yeah.
proximity. So I'm seeing that the people whose obligations are less want to come in, and especially we know that 2 out of 3 relationships romantic relationships start because of the office, and I don't mean that in an
Mhm.
inappropriate way, meaning
Right.
I'd introduce you to one of my friends who works someplace else, but you met
Yeah.
that person because we all went out for happy hour together or we went
Exactly.
on a weekend, right? So
Yeah.
that part, and where I look at it is from a loneliness. If we know that data
Oh,
is
yeah.
that loneliness is to a level that is worse than smoking, and if we're having
Yep.
young people, and even if they are living with their parents because of economic
Mhm.
or choice, if they're still alone all day, working all day in front of a screen and not having any in output, you can see where
Mhm.
something like a workplace could really do their head
Yeah.
and heart well. So I'm
Yes.
seeing it's that younger, and then I'm seeing on the other side, again, it depends on the age of the children, but if you're on the older side where your children are more, they have more agency and they're more functioning on their own, and you're like, wait, so my life is sitting at a desk and then sitting at the kitchen table and then going to bed and starting it again. You're like, no, I would love to, you
I
know,
wanna go somewhere.
yeah,
I wanna
have a
get dressed
meeting.
up.
Let's
Yeah.
have let's meet in person. Let's
Yeah.
meet. So
Yeah.
I I think, and again, don't know statistically, I think those of us that have had it see the
Mhm.
benefits of it. Those of us
Mhm.
that haven't had it don't understand what the benefit could be.
Mhm.
So, it's not a right or wrong thing, but you can
Right.
see that, it's that middle tier that have children, I'm gonna say, that are
Mhm.
elementary school and younger that are like, "You have no
Mhm.
idea the pressure on me to be able to make this work." And
Yeah.
we know that is absolutely the truth. We
Yeah.
also know from, I identify with a disability. We also know from a disability standpoint that when you are able to hire the person who is disabled, you raise the whole family because otherwise the family has to use their own resources to help the person who can't get a job. And if there is a physical disability and therefore you have to go into an office, that can also be challenging. And
Yeah.
yes, there's ADA compliant, but it's only at a certain percentage of depending on how many
Right.
employees you have. Like, I mean, so it's not as easy. So when you think
Right.
in those circumstances, it
Mhm.
almost makes me think of, like, do you almost have people who, like I said at the beginning, you say, you know what, I'm cool with just getting cost of living and the next 3 or 5 years, my focus is family first, but I also want to work and have intellectual stimulation and the money, and
Right.
then an opportunity to kind of almost like on-ramp and off-ramp into areas. Again,
Mhm.
it's sort of a dream. I don't know that it would happen, but to me, that feels like it would
Yeah.
both the needs. And you understand that there are trade-offs if you're not ever coming into an office when the company is requiring you to be in an
For
office.
sure. I mean, I think this is like all of this is solvable with empathetic leadership because the whole point is have conversations, get curious, ask for your people what's working for them and what's not,
Right.
right? And you can do that team by team.
Mhm.
You can do that if you're a small, small enough company. But the point is, I think what a lot of leaders are trying to do is who's figured it out? I'm going to
Yep.
do what they're going to do. And no one's figured it out because it's different depending on your company, depending on your industry, depending on what city you're in, whether you're in the suburbs or in the city proper, whether you have, public transportation available or not. There's so many factors. So there's no easy pill to swallow. It's going
Mhm.
to have to be conversations, listening sessions. What do my best people need? What do they want? How can we structure this? And what can we test and tweak as we go along? And I know that sounds like a lot of effort when you're like, okay, well, when are we going to actually get our work done? But this
Mhm.
is what I say to every leader. And I believe me, I've led teams, like I get it.
Yep.
But this is why you're a leader and you're not a doer.
Yes.
The whole point is that you're leading people. You're
Yes.
not just managing tasks. So
Yes.
I hate to say it, but that is the work right now that
Yeah,
you need
and
to
I
be
think it's
doing.
also important for companies and whoever is responsible for training, upskilling, and learning and development
Mm,
in different organizations in different
100%.
buckets. But it's also important that just because you are a subject matter expert does not mean that you are the right leader. And
100%.
we need to either upskill you, train you to understand leadership.
Hmm.
And I see this happening a lot in sales, where somebody in sales is a top financial performer, they get tapped to lead the team. And
Yeah,
suddenly, not only do they not know how to lead the team, but they're competing against their team because they're still holding a number. And
exactly.
you're
Because
like,
the
you're like,
skills they needed, yeah, the skills they needed to be a successful salesperson are very much individualistic,
yeah, thousand.
not collaborative. And then now all of a sudden you get promoted to a position where you need to foster collaboration, camaraderie, support. Do you even
But
have
you got
maybe,
a number. They didn't
but
take
you've
away your number. So you're like
exactly.
now sharp elbow with the person that's reporting to you. And it just
Yes.
is. And then they call me and we have conversations and executive
Yeah, yeah.
speaking and all of that. But so, okay, so two things I want to touch on. One is I do because it was juicy. I want you to talk about the empathy hijacking concept because this is the one
Yes.
that I really was yelling out. And then just to let our listeners know is I want you to touch on the five pillars and then I want to go
Sure.
deeper on like two of them. So,
Okay, great. Great.
so
Yeah.
tell everybody about the
Yes.
empathy hijacking.
So empathy hijacking is something I experienced um, very starkly when, and we were talking about this earlier. I almost died from a brain aneurysm in 2008,
Mm.
and I luckily survived. I'm so fortunate. I had such a miraculous recovery, and I'm high functioning now. I deal with my own cognitive deficits, but I find strategies around them.
That's why
Um,
we get along so well because
that's
I'm
why we get along. We're both
right.
brain people. Yes,
Brain
exactly.
people.
Brain people. But anyway, the desire for people to connect, they think it's empathetic when they say, "Oh, I know exactly how you feel because one time this thing happened to me and here's what I did and here's how it impacted me, yada yada yada." We're doing that with the best of intentions. Like it was happening to me of like, "I know how you feel. I can't remember anything either and I have to write everything down and da 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 da." Great. I wasn't like that like 2 months ago.
That wasn't
I'm
my
like it's
experience.
different. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. What it does is number one, it instead of being empathetic and letting the person talk or vent or feel what they feel, it kind of silences the
Yeah.
feelings, right?
Shut it
It's
down.
the other form of this. Well, at least, right? The fires
Yeah.
in LA. Well, at least your family's all safe. I still have my
I
my house just burned down. I'm still having trauma, right? Like
yeah.
I don't
I
need
mean,
Pollyanna right now, right?
yeah.
But empathy hijacking is, again, done with all good intentions to make people feel like they're not alone. But what it does is it decenters the narrative from the person that needs the empathy
To
now
you.
to you. And now
Mhm.
you're also in advice giving mode. And they might not be ready for advice right now.
Yes.
The better thing
And
is
to
to
your
ask for
point
consent.
around excuse me a second, the point that you said around the houses burning in LA, I think also for listeners that are in the workplace, when your colleague has gone through a loss, and whether it's a pregnancy, a parent, a family member, a pet, it's the same thing where I see this happening a lot where instantly it's like, oh, well, when my insert person died, da 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 da. And it's like, that person has just gone through a major grief.
Yeah,
2 ears, 1 mouth, use them proportionally. Shush. This is not the time to be let them have the space to express. And I just want to
exactly.
say that
Yeah.
because I think around grief and bereavement, it's especially egregious.
Yes, yes, for sure. And I think that's the point is that again, it's done with good intentions of I'm trying to make this person feel less alone or less like something's wrong. I want to take away their pain, right? So I go into telling them my story or problem solving for them.
Mhm,
And now I've just taken away their ability to process, their ability to speak or have space or now it's about me.
mhm.
So we want to avoid empathy hijacking. And so there's a time and a place where you can say, this must be really tough for you. And, I'm happy to share what I went through when you're ready to hear it.
Right.
And they
Asking.
may come to you later of like, yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready for some advice. I'd like to hear what you did or how you solved this problem.
Right. Right. Yes, beautifully. I mean, it's like I want to underline and highlight when
Hmm.
we're in the office and we're in a workplace, we do have these false, like formed relationships that sometimes they might be legitimate friendships, sometimes they might just be friendly relationships. So you don't want to put your small intestines on the table. You don't want the world to know, but at the same time, you're like
Yeah.
grieving over or whatever this situation,
Yeah.
right? You're in a place and having someone, I sometimes call them conversational narcissists, but
Yeah.
this idea of like redirecting back to your experience. And we have to remember we don't all have the same socioeconomic background. You also might be at a different pay scale where you're able to hire that person to help you with that thing where
Mhm, mhm.
I'm not in that situation, right?
Right.
Just understanding the different layers and
Th
nuances
the
that not
best phrase
everyone.
the best phrase I heard during the pandemic was, "We might all be in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat."
Mhm.
And
1,000.
that's what we have to remember for any trauma, any ordeal, any issue that someone's having, is it might be the same storm,
Yeah.
but they're in a different boat.
Good bone, yeah.
Yeah.
And I love what you said about saying, "I can relate to that, and at some point, if you ever wanna talk about how I managed it, I'm here for you." Just
Yeah.
something like that is a way to validate what they're saying, but not
Mhm.
centering it on yourself.
Right. I've discovered in over the years, and especially after I really started researching empathy, that the appropriate response when someone shares something tough or terrible or whatever is just to say, "Yeah, that sounds really tough." That's even when I've had friends that have lost parents, for example, I'll even, there's nothing I can say. This sucks.
Yeah,
This is terrible.
right.
And they're like, yeah. And we feel like we don't want to say that because we think we're going to send them into a downward spiral. They're already in the downward spiral. They want to be acknowledged. They want
Right,
to know that
right,
they're not losing their mind because they feel this way, right?
right.
So sometimes that's enough. It's
Yeah,
just to say, I see you, and that sounds really hard right now.
yeah, yeah,
What can I do?
yeah.
What do you need? What do you need?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Alright, moving to our last section, I want if you could hit on the 5 pillars, and
Hmm.
then I think I wanna go deeper or get a little more information on 2 of them, but go
Okay,
for it.
great. Yeah. So the pillars are what I call the 5 pillars of empathetic and effective leadership. And I was trying to deconstruct the recipe from these leaders that seemingly with no effort are both empathetic and high performing. And so I did hundreds of interviews through my podcast. I did lots of research, and these were the 5 common threads that came up over and over again. So they're meant to be a framework, not for strengthening your empathy. That was the previous book, The Empathy Edge. But if you are trying to be an empathetic leader and you feel or you know that performance is slipping, people are walking all over you, you're losing your own personal boundaries, look to the pillars to see if one of them might need to be strengthened, because that might be a clue as to what's going on about how you're not able to have that balance.
Mm,
So the 5 pillars are self awareness, self care, clarity, decisiveness, and joy.
mm,
So, real quick, self care, or sorry, self awareness, you need to know what you're bringing into the interaction. And you need to put your ego aside and say, it doesn't matter if you have been a CEO for 20 years, you always have more to learn. So, what are your strengths? What are your blind spots? What are your challenges? What are your emotional triggers so that you know what you're bringing into the interaction and you can adjust accordingly and manage accordingly, right? Self-care is not manis and petties. It's
right.
being able to recharge your battery and fill your capacity, because if you are at half capacity, you are not able to be empathetic without you're not able to take in other points of view without defensiveness or fear.
Mhm,
So, how are you recharging? How are you resting? How are you taking care of your mind, your body, your soul?
mhm,
And that could be anything from paid time off and making sure you're taking it and modeling it for your team, by the way, right? It could be something very calming. It could be yoga or meditation or reading. For some people, it's something very active to
mm,
recharge their brain. It's like rock climbing or training for a marathon. So self-awareness helps to understand what you need for self-care, right? Clarity is really not just about being kind, it's about keeping people in a state where they're not anxious, they're not fearful, they're not under stress. Are you being clear about values, norms, expectations, the mission, the purpose, feedback? Are you giving actionable feedback? Like you're doing a great job or you could be doing better is not actionable feedback. So making sure that we are crystal clear when we're communicating, because you can't hold someone accountable to an expectation you've never set. So what I hear sometimes is, I'm a really empathetic leader. I listen to my team. I'm always there for them, but like they're just not accountable. Um, Take a look at clarity. I spoke to one leader of a very large global advertising agency, has had very young, hungry workforce. The minute they got clear on career progression, career advancement, mission, values. Entitlement went away. This idea of constantly
Yeah.
asking for more went away because they knew where they
Got it now.
stood, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Decisiveness, don't let things linger. Don't keep people in limbo forever. Even in the name of, I'm trying to get everyone's opinion about everything. Yes, you want to synthesize multiple points of view. You don't want to be a dictator, but learn to synthesize quickly and transparently and make a call and then communicate that back to the team. Here's why this decision was made.
Mm,
Jill, we loved your idea about X. It actually provoked a really great conversation, but here's why we're not going to be able to include that in the proposal. But please keep those ideas coming, Jill, because it really sparked a great conversation. Now I've encouraged you to continue giving feedback, but I've also explained why the decision was made. So now you can disagree but commit to
yeah.
the decision, right?
Right.
And then joy is just, kind of what we were talking about earlier. It's not just about being funny as a leader. It's about, and it doesn't mean the work's going to be joyful every moment. Like we'll still have to do budget spreadsheets and all that kind of jazz. But although for some people that is joy, I should say. So, to
Right.
each their own. But it's really about creating levity, even especially when the work gets hard.
Mm,
Is there camaraderie? Are you encouraging workplace friendships? You spoke earlier, the data around friends at work. If you have a friend at work, your engagement is higher, your performance is higher, absenteeism is lower, all of these great things,
mhm,
right? So are you encouraging some levity? And you don't have to think of it all yourself. Let your team get involved. You might have people that want to start a really fun Slack channel, or
yeah.
it's not a waste of time. Those moments are what enable us to engage and be there for each other. So when the work gets tough, we're in it with each other and we
Yeah.
want to show up for each other.
Yeah. And I also think about my own experiences, the experiences clients share with me, is that it is that connection around sometimes the insanity of what we're doing, even though there is a clear
Yeah.
end goal, but in order to get there, we
Yeah.
have to do it this way. And some
Yeah.
of the jokes that come out of that are
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
water out your nose because you're
Yeah.
like laugh out loud kind of funny, but
I
just
was
those
I was
moments.
in a really negative culture multiple times, but one particular time. But my immediate team, we built a microculture of being very close, having a lot of levity, a lot of camaraderie. And one of the things that was like our calm in the storm of that environment was a bunch of us went to lunch every day together. Like no matter what. We might have taken a little bit longer than we should have, but that was actually like a joy. That kept us going. It
Yeah,
powered us through the rest of the stuff we had to deal with so that we could perform.
right. I love it. I love it. So my last question is what advice would you give to a worker who isn't in a position for various reasons that they can leave and
Mhm.
clearly have found themselves with an unempathetic leader?
Mhm.
Should they go to HR? Should they not? Like that's always a sticky, sticky one.
I
So
know.
I'd love
Well,
to get
y-
your thoughts on that.
yeah. Well, I mean, it depends on what's happening, right? If it's something where you're physically or psychologically in danger, you should go to HR. But if it's just, I don't know if it's an HR violation that you're not empathetic. Unfortunately, that's not an HR
Yeah,
violation yet.
being a jerk is not a
Yeah,
fireable
unfortunately, yeah. It's not. Um, But I would say, I actually gave this advice to a friend of mine like a year ago who was dealing with someone who just, as an example, completely talked over her, wouldn't take her ideas, was constantly like, "Let's do it this way, let's do it this way." Just very difficult to work with. And I said, "Did you try like a little Jedi mind trick of like practicing empathy with that person? You don't have to tell this person you're practicing empathy, but what would happen in your status meetings if you just let her talk and you supported every one of her ideas?" So, like, Jill, that sounds like a really interesting idea. Tell me more about that. Tell me more. Okay, interesting. And actually just not push against it anymore.
Right,
What
right.
would happen? Like, just see what would happen. Maybe she's coming on so strong because she feels like you're not
Not
valuing
listening.
or
Right,
listening to her ideas. And
right.
maybe there's a little bit of insecurity about, well, I'm just going to keep pushing this because I can, because I'm in the. So that's what I would say is try to like, do this little Jedi trick of responding with empathy to your boss and asking questions instead of always giving them a wall to push against.
Mhm.
See what, and just get curious. Do it for a week. They
Mm,
might think something's wrong with you. I don't know, but do it for a week and see what happens.
mm,
Support, you don't have to support what they're saying if you don't agree with it, but if they are, it depends on what the issue is. If they're always talking over you, if they're always poo-pooing your
right.
ideas, get curious and start asking them questions and actively listening to them and see how it changes the tenor of the relationship. Because if we're not empathetic, that could be ego, that could be insecurity, that could be fear driving that. And if you show up in the interaction as the empathetic one, you are actually setting the tone even if they never acknowledge it,
Mm,
that that's what you're doing. And like I said, if you're like, "Oh, this will never work with this person," try it for a week
right.
and see what happens.
Happen.
That would be my best advice for that because it's not your job to change the other person. All you can do is show up how you show up. And if you are an empathetic colleague, if you are an empathetic worker, you tend to be able to build engagement and buy-in because of that behavior.
Mm,
So try it on that person that you're pushing up against instead of trying to make them change for
yes,
you and
and
see what
feel.
happens.
I think that is a perfect spot to leave this. So, Maria, thank you so much for being here. I will put all of your information in the show notes, where to get Maria's book, where to follow her on the socials, and where she puts out great work. And if you have questions, always email me at hello@jillgriffincoaching.com. We will get those questions to Maria. We will bring her back and have her answer questions if
That'd be great.
send them along. We'd love to have you back. So until next time, I'm going to tell all of you, embrace empathy, be intentional and kind. I'll see you soon.